Hi, I'm Randy Cantrell. Welcome to the Year of the Peer podcast with Leo Batari. This podcast is based on a simple truth. Who you surround yourself with matters. Author and keynote speaker Leo Batari will interview thought leaders from all walks of life who will share how they leverage peer advantage and show you how engaging your peers more purposefully can hold the key to greater success in business and in life. Today's guest is Dan Hoffman. Dan loves growing companies, delivering great service, and applying technology. He believes that business is philosophy in action, culture eats strategy for breakfast, and learning is leverage. Over the course of 12 years, Dan started, grew, and sold M5, a pioneer in the cloud communications industry. In 2014, Dan was selected as a Henry Crown Fellow and spent 2 years with his family in Spain. Today, Dan is building Circles, an idea that came out of a recent sabbatical in Barcelona. Circles fosters deeper conversation to create enduring connections and learning. We welcome Dan to the show.
Dan Hoffman, welcome to Year of the Peer. So exciting to have you here. I know when we met for the very first time earlier in this year, I was just really intrigued with the work you're doing at Circles, and just couldn't imagine having this podcast series without adding your voice to the conversation. So really appreciate that very much that you agreed to join us here today. But I'd love just to get started. I'd just love to get people to get a sense of kind of your background, and then of course the work you're doing now, and just give everyone a sense of who Dan Hoffman is and what you're all about.
Thanks, Leo. I'm just so happy to be part of this, and I know you and I share a mission in many ways. So my story is as an entrepreneur. I had a couple of businesses and then a successful run building a company called M5. We started it in 2000, sold it in 2012. Traditional venture-backed play, worked for the parent for a couple of years. And I had a chance to reflect after that on what I wanted to be if I grew up. And that reflection produced the project I'm working on now, which is Circles. The thing that I loved more than anything in that ride building a business was the learning journey, both my own and also creating a culture of learning at work. I found when someone came to me that was lit up with that spark, that ignition of I'm going to become a HR manager, better programmer, better salesperson, like that was the energy that really powered our company and my own journey. So I set off to start studying learning, working on learning and development, and chase that feeling. And that led to the project of Circles.
Interesting. What I found, and I've said, many times, when I started not only being a student, but also as a instructor in graduate school, we've got all these very experienced people in a room. It was really different from the learning experience growing up, where you have somebody at the front of the class and they're just talking at the students and you're taking notes and all that. Here you've got all this intellectual capital in the room. And in my view, and I know as an instructor, if I'm doing my job well, I'm going to try to create the environment where they learn the most from one another, maybe second from the material, and then whatever I can add, great, But this idea of people, when you bring all of those perspectives and all that brain power together, and it's what got me excited about working with peer groups, outside of the academic setting eventually, because it all works very much the same way, and it's really exciting.
We learn better in circles than we do in rows.
Exactly.
And, when I reflected on my own learning journey, I thought about all of the coaches and the consultants and the courses that I subscribed to, got help from as I learned to be a CEO. But my peer group, and I very fortunately had a YPO peer group for most of that time, was probably the most impactful, most important. And one other story that opened my eyes to this, as we looked for ways to do learning across a company at scale, one of the non-traditional things we tried LMSs and performance reviews and many of the traditional corporate university stuff. But the program that really kicked the culture into gear for us was when we hired the School of Rock. And we gave the opportunity for employees to pick one of 5 rock instruments. We outfit our conference rooms with as a jam room setup, and you could take your guitar lesson, keyboard lesson once a week, and then the School of Rock instructor would work with you as a band. And at the end of this, we ran it multiple seasons, multiple years. At the end of about 9 months, we would have a big battle of the bands where people came together, never having played instruments before, and competed. And like the story that sticks out in my mind was Bridget's, who was my assistant, wanted to play the drums her whole life. It was on her bucket list. And she was unbelievable at the end of this journey, like so on fire. And then she came afterwards in the afterglow of this great Battle of the Bands event and said, I really want to be a human resources executive. And this has reminded me about learning. I had that learning is a team sport, that you need a path and coaches and practice, and I can do it. And today, Bridget is now running human resources at a startup in New York. She made the jump, she made the journey, and she has a drum kit in her basement.
I'll tell you, in addition to the team sport aspect of it, what I really love is that, Bridget probably thought that this whole idea of playing the drums was something that if she didn't start it when she was a kid, that opportunity had passed her by.
Exactly.
And what she learned is that, I don't know, I got a lot of time ahead of me. I can, what's keeping me from, learning the drums starting today? And then she does it. And what does that do? That inspires a confidence in her that I can be an HR manager and I can be probably anything else that I want to do in my life, because now she understands that she can draw upon that experience of playing the drums and now being HR manager and being able to know how to access people around her, right? And how to figure out, I can do anything I want no matter how old I am.
Leo, you've seen the magic. When you get a circle of peers helping and giving help, it can light that fire for people. It can reawaken something for people. And I think even in our education system, there are a lot of places that do use circles. If you go to Phillips Exeter, one of the most prestigious private schools in the country, they use something called the Harkness method, which every class is done in a circle. If you go to a top graduate school, well, you have a seminar, right? And I think we know that learning in conversation and learning in distance, but get a bunch of grown-ups and you put them in their Vistage peer group for the first time, it's like a fire is lit. And part of my mission has been that to take that feeling, that fire that does exist for, I think, about 100,000 CEOs across Vistage, EO, YPO, and some of the other groups, and ask the question, why doesn't everyone in the world have this? Why can't this circle idea be a structure that really helps people of all walks of life learn together and move forward in their lives?
Well, one of the reasons for writing The Power of Peers, that was published back in 2016 was this idea of how does something that works so unbelievably well for so many people is used by so few when you really look at the broad landscape of it, whether it's CEOs or business leaders at all different levels. And it's really remarkable when you think about it. And for many, conducted a number of focus groups, for example, where you'd ask people, what are the ways that you might think about learning? Well, the books, executive development programs, go to business school. I mean, they'd name 50 things before they ever got to, join a peer group. It's almost like there wasn't really a language around it. There wasn't a narrative for it. They didn't know really what it was or how to access it, and it was so not top of mind. And my hope, of course, is that, with a whole bunch of people having conversations like the one we're having right now, people will seek out how to have more circles, how to expand the circles they have, how to make sure that the circle they have is the right circle for them in terms of, helping them in their lives and how they can help others. I just think there's such great opportunity here and this is why I've really loved the work you're doing, because so much of what you're doing with circles, and I'd love for you to explain it in greater detail, is you're really creating the kind of access to circles that I think people don't always feel they have. It could be what they perceive as time issues or financial or whatever, but
yeah, I mean, our mission is to make it easy for people to connect deeply, to learn, grow, and work together, right? To make it easy. And so I've been working on this for a few years. The first thing we tried was video. Because, you know, when you think about scaling and impact of circles, when you think about doing interesting combinations, finding the right people, you really see how diversity can fuel learning. Video makes it all a lot easier from a business model point of view. And so when we started experimenting this, I started self-funding and doing experiments a couple of years ago. I didn't think I was going to have to invest so much into the video experience. I thought some of the existing tools would work, but its culture is so powerful, and most of those tools, which are awesome and opening up new worlds for us, use presentation as the metaphor, one-to-many. So whether it's Zoom or Skype or WebEx, they're really good for presentations, not so much for conversations, particularly these kinds of peer So we found that we were building technology to really control that experience, warm it up, use some of the principles of facilitation, bake them into the technology to try and chase this question, you know, can I have these deep peer learning experiences over video? And we have seen yes, you can. But it does take a couple new tools, and that's the path we've been on. We've built a video room, a video experience, and some tools to unlock this for what we think a much larger scale point is than, you know, having a bunch of CEOs take a day out of the office, you know, every month. So video has been super important to it, and this is where technology, for all the ways it fosters a more shallow relationship. You know, I'm connected to thousands of people now. It can also be used, if we're purposeful about it, to foster the kind of deep connection that you and I have seen work magic.
Well, and I think that that's what really struck me about what you're doing, because we have all kinds of ways of connecting with people, as we know, whether on whatever platform, pick one, LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever, and we, you know, engage in certain ways. But, you know, there's also been a shift to how many followers do I have, to how many deep connections can I create, and how can we facilitate those connections, which I think is why, you know, what you're doing with circles is so timely, because I think it's exactly what people are really seeking out right now when it comes to the value that they know can be had from these relationships. But I guess what I'd like for you to do, just so that we can kind of start from the beginning in many ways, is, so let's say I could be working at a big company, I could be wanting to start my own company, whatever, and I'm an aspiring entrepreneur, intrapreneur, whatever that happens to be, and I want to make sure that I'm surrounding myself with people who can help me in my career, and hopefully I can help them in theirs. So talk to us about the kind of people that may join circles, how they might go about doing that, and then what is the experience really like? How often? Who's involved? What can they expect? And I know there's a lot of questions embedded here, and what kind of value, you know, they get from it, so that if they join circles today, a year from now, they measure success by saying, I got X from it.
Well, this has been our mission and our journey. And so I'll give you a couple of answers. If I'm an entrepreneur working in a large company, or an entrepreneur, you know, they're really the same thing, right?
Yeah.
And I think you and I have both believed that this is the future of the workforce, that we are the CEO of our own journey, and this set of skills, the need for agency and control, all of this matters wherever you are in the knowledge economy, and it's how humans are going to beat back the robots, right? So how do I? Well, we've realized at Circles that there are a few different entry points for someone, and one of them maybe you and I haven't talked about in a while, but one of them that's working actually very, very well for us is you can make a lot of progress with your current work team. We've taken a team from the Cleveland Clinic, a team from the Scale Up Institute, groups from a Swedish milk carton company called Tetra Pak, and applied many of the same processes that external peer groups of CEOs from different companies use, and it's really working well. Some of the principles of doing deep learning together really scratch an itch within work teams and start to hit on themes like bringing your whole self to work, like giving and getting help, listening to each other. Google's Aristotle project showed us that the most important component in that team feeling is equal participation. Applying rules like that, which we all know from the peer group world, to your work team. So we have launched a program that trains people on the principles of designing a great meeting and bringing those back to work. We do it in circles using our tool for meetings. And then we've seen people take all kinds of tactical meetings, strategic meeting agendas, apply these principles, and really, start by revolutionizing their work team. And I think a lot of people are suffering because meetings are difficult. We have to do so much over video. So these principles can make a big impact. So I wanted to throw that out there because that's becoming a really interesting entry point. Now, once you start to believe in the power of learning this way, there are a number of partner organizations that we work with that have wonderful structures around learning, like Vistage, like YPO, like EO. We're launching Entrepreneur.io, does an entrepreneurship conference. They'll put people in circles after that conference. We work with Eric Rees's consultancy called Bionic that works with GE and Procter & Gamble and makes those organizations more entrepreneurial. They're starting to use circles in that work. Groups like 7 CTOs in San Diego does CTO peer group and are using circles technology. So we've empowered a number of these communities and partners to add the peer group component really effectively. And that's another entry point. But circles also sort of running some retail circles too, and people can reach out to us. Anyway, that's one answer to your question. Another is, what does it look like? What does it feel like? The video is different than in person. So I know, for example, if you do a Vistage or a YPO peer group, you're in person for 4, maybe even 7 or 8 hours. That's really tough over video.
Yeah.
So we've learned that about an hour and a half, maybe with slightly more frequency, is up to 2 hours is the right amount of time. We also know, you exchange a lot of information. There's no denying it when you're in person. And so group sizes can be maybe 10, maybe 11 people and work efficiently because I see body language. You lose some of that in video. And so we see smaller group sizes working better over video, maybe capping at 8 people. And if you think about a meeting of 6 or 7 people for 90 minutes, everyone gets a good 10, 15 minutes.
Right.
And that's really us. So it's one of the things we've learned. The other thing that's really important is taking time at the beginning to gel the group. Now, this came out of the Aristotle project. We know this from other peer group work. When you get a connection on a human level, all the other information flows more quickly. I'm much more likely to respond to your email. And in fact, best practices on software teams is to have an in-person kickoff, right, followed by virtual. So when we can't do that because we have 7 people matched who are corporate controllers of manufacturing companies around the world, super interesting conversation, but you need to take some time to gel the group. And if you're very deliberate about that, and you can go deep pretty quickly, by maybe burning a meeting or 2 just on that, you can give the group some real momentum as you move to the phase where you're exploring each other's challenges more deeply. And so we've seen a rhythm actually of a weekly meeting over video for the first month. followed by a lower frequency. It might be every other week or even every month for a couple hours, as some of our groups do, being the right way. So very concretely, you set up, you maybe with a partner or us, we match the peer group, then you have a meeting every month, and then go to lower frequency, and it's all done over video with a headset and a good laptop, and that's what it's like.
So am I correct, though? I thought when we had talked, you'd mentioned that to get the group started, you may be involved, or not you personally necessarily, but someone is involved in kind of facilitating the group.
That's right.
In the early parts of it. And then they go back. It ends up being self-facilitated eventually once the rules of engagement and once everything kind of gets set and the group gels, to your point. Is that fair?
Yes. This skill of moderating a peer group is so applicable to leadership. And we were actually, in training people to moderate their own groups, we call guiding, we are teaching people real leadership principles.
Right.
And this is why people coming back into their team meetings find so much value in principles like equal airtime and how you do that, and how why you don't have someone hog the mic, why you call on the introvert that has the amazing idea in a meeting. It's like magic. And so learning leadership skills like that is part of the experience. We've trained lots of people to do that, and with relatively little training, especially because we built tools like timers and automated agendas and progress bars into our tool. But you can do it in WebEx, you can do it in Skype, you can do it in a room. Once somebody's learned that and somebody takes on that role, they can the guide that got you going can sort of disappear like scaffolding, and you have this beautiful rhythm. In fact, in many cases, multiple people have had that training or will learn from each other, and you can kind of rotate the responsibility. It's good meeting practice. Who's going to take notes? Who's going to facilitate? Who's going to craft the agenda? When you have roles in a meeting, you get a lot farther and a lot more effectively than so many of our meetings where we just sort of go in and sit down and say, okay, we're here to talk about sales,
Well, the other thing I'd like to, expand on a little bit too is, so you talked about, so in one scenario, I may be a marketing person or a CTO or whatever from a manufacturing firm, and I sit around with other people who may hold my position in those firms, and we work with one another and we share practices and experiences and help each other with questions and issues and all. Then there's the kind of the internal team piece, which you mentioned, which I find really interesting, because one of the findings we had with the Power of Peers was when we talked about the 5 factors that we felt were common to high-performing peer groups, which are having the right people in the room, that safe and trusting environment, the fostering valuable interactions so the people are productive, that they're accountable to one another, not just to the leader, and whoever is leading provides that servant leadership model in that they serve as a steward of those 4 factors, and they are really there to make the group successful, not for them to make that leader successful, right? And that was common, of course, not just to really high-performing peer groups, but that's what makes for a great team as well. But what's interesting is there's a whole other layer, I feel, when you do this with an internal group, where it's not just about individual growth, it's really about how you bring a team together in a way that's a bit different from the other kind of peer groups. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about some of what you've seen in that regard and how it's brought teams together and make them work together more effectively.
Well, you're exactly right. Those 5 factors apply at work. And, we've seen, in fact, I'm going to a conference this week in the YPO world called Business Powered by Forum, where a bunch of YPOers who have found their forums to be the most powerful learning experience of their lives are trying to work on how do we bring this back into the workplace. So I think you're right. It starts with that servant leadership model. It starts with people that believe that their companies will grow as quickly as their people grow, and that it's about unlocking the power of peers at work in as much, instead of command and control. I'm talking later with the General Stanley McChrystal's consulting firm. Stan McChrystal took over a command of our efforts in Afghanistan and found that the traditional military hierarchical command and control was too slow, right? So he just wrote a book called Team of Teams, which is all about how servant leadership can work in this most hierarchical and bureaucratic of American institutions.
Right.
In fact, how it's the only way to work. And his metric was the number of missions run. And by switching to this type of team of teams approach, he radically, I forget the metric, but it was like 10 times the number of missions run, because the decision-making was pushed out to the teams, and the learning came all the way back up through. And so we're speaking later, we were on a stage at Vern Harnish's conference a few months ago. Another guy who's like surprising, but on the same mission you and I are on.
Sure.
We just believe in circles, not rows, even in the military. And we're speaking with Homeland Security, we're speaking with the State Department, because they have peer learning programs going on in these institutions that one would think of as traditional hierarchies. Hierarchies are breaking down. We need to unlock our teams. We need to learn how to do team. And I think the lessons of the peer world and the processes and technologies that we've developed in peer learning are the answer inside of the Cleveland Clinic, inside of traditional business schools, working with ESE in Barcelona with a very traditional executive training program, same thing. How do we unlock our teams? How do we create that feeling of team? How do we create the power of teams? And it's just a cousin of the power of peers.
Well, it's so interesting because, and I've seen it obviously many times, and whether it's at a YPO or EO or Vistage or whatever, is that leaders who participate in these groups do it for certain reasons. It's usually not because they want it to help them be better team leaders back at their company. So it's kind of this almost passive learning experience that when they've been doing it for a year, they pick up all these amazing skills and these amazing practices from working with other CEOs that allow them to bring that into their organization, help their teams work together more effectively. And this is where I think if we can get more CEOs and business leaders to understand the value of that, not only for themselves and what we talk about oftentimes as the reasons you may get involved in these peer groups, the way they can bring these practices into their organization and how incredibly effective they can be is just hugely powerful. And that's why I'm definitely, and they're like you and like Vern and some of the other people, we've had Scott Mordell and Sam Reese on the phone on the podcast and all as well.
Great podcast, by the way. Yeah, listen.
Oh, thanks. And who I think share this idea that, boy, if we could ever equip CEOs and business leaders with the experience and the skills, what they could do back in their organizations is just limitless. I mean, there's just so much that they can bring to their people that could be enormously powerful.
I think it's a super important movement. It's at the essence of the kinds of cultures that we need to build the kinds of companies we want. And the other thing that the corporation itself is changing. So these conversations that you're having with your peers from outside your company and the conversations that you're having inside the company, the work that Upwork are doing, and some, like, how do you put a freelance team together quickly? The fact that average tenure in a job has dropped below a couple years now, and we are in fact having to build relationships very quickly to do deep work, and that's changing all the time. And then there's the societal impact of all of this, right? You could go one of two ways. We could become more atomized. The bowling alone narrative, where we're increasingly not going to our bowling club. We're increasingly average male having like 1.3 real friends now, down from 3. I mean, there are these narratives going on in society as people change jobs a lot and as people work at home in their computers a lot. And then there's the really important call, I think, to learn how to form circles, go deep with people, use this at work, use this personally, to build that human connection, because we are, a social animal, and we need to stitch these diverse points of view together to be successful at work and to build a successful society. And we're seeing that, on every level. So I think the understanding of the importance of doing it, the skill of how to do it, the tools to make it easy are, for me, the reason why I'm dedicating this portion of my life to this work, and I know you are too, and I think it's super important.
As you are putting your groups together, how do you go about getting people who've never done this before to really bring their whole selves to that experience? Because, as you well know, for many people like this, they don't have a place where they can sit down with other people and not have to put their best face forward all the time and everything's great and actually really be themselves and really talk about, challenges and all that. I guess I've found in some respects that because people don't have it in their life, when they're put in a situation where they believe that it is available, they're ready to go. I mean, you can't stop them. They're ready to share. For others, however, that becomes, they're a little more reluctant. And to your point earlier, this idea of, people being equal contributors can kind of be an issue in that regard, right? When it comes to, because over time, if someone believes, hey, I'm in here, I'm all in, I'm sharing, and I feel like these few people are holding back all the time. What gives? What's going on here? How do you go about creating that place where, on one hand, maybe you've got this perfectly safe environment. On the other hand, people aren't really leveraging it and using it in the way that really maximizes that experience.
Well, I'll have to unpack there. And again, this is the grand experiment that we're working on with circles. I mean, the process is amazing in terms of unlocking this safe space for people. There are a lot of ingredients that we cook with. Not all of them have to be present. So, for example, confidentiality is a linchpin of many CEO peer groups. There's different levels of confidentiality, but it's very difficult to use that particular ingredient when you're dealing with a work team.
Right.
So equal airtime is one that I've been running my my board as a circle, trying to make it a place of vulnerability instead of and getting help instead of a place where I show the best numbers every month. And one of my investors and advisors said, don't call on me with this random number generator. When I have something to say, I'll speak up. Like. You see, and then I had someone the other day say, I love when you put the person in the middle, knowing you're going to get called on ups everyone's game. It just, really makes that meeting time, that conversation so much more effective and powerful. Susan Cain wrote Quiet, the Introvert Revolution, and there's been a lot of attention to this movement. And I think one of the things we've discovered is that having a safe space where you're going to get called on and there's no small talk. 40% of the population introverts. It's actually a lot higher with entrepreneurs. You hate small talk. So it's like building this place where there's no small talk. I know everyone's going to speak equally. I'm not going to have to sit there listening to someone run on. Unlocks this thing for people with an introvert profile. So anyway, to summarize, process and the right mix of ingredients for the right case does produce this experience of deep and safe space and opening up that's very powerful. It produces it fairly consistently. Some people say it's not my cup of tea, and that's fine. We sort of build that into the model. Some people don't realize that's what's happening. So there's a very interesting thing we've seen where there's lousy attendance if you're not careful at meeting 4. By meeting 3, things get kind of hot. And you see in meeting 4, people have a bunch of different excuses for why they're not coming. They all in the post-meeting debrief say, oh, this was amazing. We reached a safe space and we reached new depth in the conversation. But then unconsciously, they have a kid's, softball game to go to at that. And so we've learned to predict this in the data, talk a little bit about accountability and dependability side of trust and how the peer group only works. And we predict, you're going to get beaten up. It's going to get pretty intense and you're going to feel like you've got some excuse. What are we going to do about that? So, we're getting more and more data, more and more techniques to apply to, bake this cake and produce a recurrently effective experience for people.
The accountability that you brought up reminds me of, we had a woman on a few weeks ago, Dr. Cecilia Hauser, and she works for Korn Ferry Hay Group. And she talks about how they'll have webinars, and maybe there's 20 people in the webinar. And she said, how webinars can be where everyone's remote and somebody's walking the dog or they're doing the dishes or something, and they're, quote, kind of listening to this in the background. He said, well, most of the facilitators there are very much about, reminding people that you will be called on. So again, it ups everyone's game, right? It's like where she says, oh, Cecilia, what'd you think about that? And it's like, you're going to be ready as if you are all in engaged, not that you were doing 3 or 4 other things. And it's just, so now you have everyone all in the way they should be, in that session remotely, but it's just a fun, level of accountability there. That's great.
I mean, this was a surprise too with the video tool we built, because we, everyone's face is in a circle, and as I said, you're in the middle when the focus is on you. There's nowhere to hide. You're going to get called on, and it's producing a very different video meeting experience from what people are used to. There is no multitasking. There's a focus on being present. It's pretty simple, but it produces a really deep, effective meeting. And that's why people are trying to bring this into their teams more and more. Because, so many of us have to work in these distributed remote teams. It's kind of a necessary evil in some ways. And a lot of people are missing that sense of team and sense of team power. And a lot of tools are chasing this. And we think bringing some of the peer technologies, peer learning practices into teams might be a really powerful way to get back some of that humanity and team feeling in these distributed teams. Presence. We even built an option to do a breathing and centering exercise into the interface to really foster deep presence in meetings very quickly. Our advisor, Shirzad Shamin, has spread this through Stanford and out in the YPO. Get a bunch of type A people doing a quick breathing centering exercise at the beginning of a meeting. And it's like you snap them into a more present place with each other to do real work. It's a lot less creepy to do that over video than it is holding hands in a conference room, by the way. So it's amazing what we can do when we get to a deep place in meetings, when we get to the zone.
So obviously, even everything we've been talking about, it's a big topic. There's lots of pieces to it. But if I could challenge you for a minute to say, what's the one thing we haven't talked about that you'd like to make sure we cover before we're done with the podcast today? What do you want to make sure our listeners understand about either circles, about the power and importance of surrounding yourself with the right people in general that you'd like to share?
Well, like you say, there are lots of angles to this. I've been focused on the process of what we've learned from peer groups and how to spread those philosophies and practices. And I think once people get a taste of it, but there's another side to it that we haven't talked about, which maybe falls under the heading of networking. And I think in my own life, there's a connection between the people I'm around and the ruts I get in. We are continually reinforcing our behavior patterns, healthy or unhealthy, by the people that we are around. I had this experience of sold my company. I got picked for a fellowship at the Aspen Institute that takes people in different career paths, different professions, but they're all at a transition, and breaks those patterns, put us together with 20 super amazing people, all of whom want to work on a social problem in this next phase of their career. And that act of changing my social networks changed my world, upped my game. I can't disappoint this group because I've got to work on, putting the entire world in circles now instead of just, having a good business. Their motto is from success to significance. And I think many of us aren't deliberate about the power of peers. Where do you want to go? And how do you want to change the people around you? Who do you want to be? And how do you change the people around you to become that version of yourself? We can't buy a self-help book and sit at home and read it and make a change. We just can't, you know. So that piece of going to a meetup, establishing a group, joining a group, forming a peer group, taking that leap is I think one of the most important ways to get ourselves to the next level. I've just had this experience, and I think that it's something that I will take with me as I evolve as a person and want to get things done in the world, and change the peer configuration, change who you are.
Yeah, well, I think to your point, self-help doesn't mean buy your self-help,
Team help, maybe. Yeah.
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 And as you know, and I'll mention here to the audience too, that, the book I have coming out in spring, What Anyone Can Do, that you are writing the foreword, and I'm so appreciative of that. And as you know, the premise really of it comes from, Joe Henderson, who used to write for Runner's World, who basically talked about this notion of success. He was doing it in the context of running, but did it in larger context as well. Basically saying, look, you look at people who are really successful, it isn't because they're capable of superhuman feats or they can do things no one else can do. So they pretty much do the things anyone could do, but most of us just don't. And we don't do it with any consistency, and we don't do it very often. And one of the things I think that anyone can do is surround yourself with people that can help you do those little things just a little more often. And if we do that in our lives, we can do some, amazing things. We can, achieve that New Year's resolution that University of Scranton says 92% of us fail at every year.
Right.
I mean, really, it's just, most of us, when we set New Year's resolutions, they're not unrealistic. They're not things that we don't want for ourselves, but somehow we don't do them. And we don't enlist others to really help us out, with that. And I think if we did, I think there's an aspect of courage and generosity that's around this idea of people coming together and just really helping one another, be their best selves, in every way, whether that's personally or professionally, but, it's everything you talked about.
No, and I'm super excited to be part of this book. I think it's going to be a call to action for a lot of people in the right direction. It's doubling down on what makes us most human, what our strengths as humans are in a time when we're facing some challenges at the workplace with automation, challenges with figuring out how we live together. And I think thinking about these social structures in our own lives, doing a few of these things that we know have worked for centuries, huddling around a campfire, being, families and tribes. How do we make that positive? How do we use this to be positive instead of divisive? And I think it's big.
Well, and I do want to touch on one other thing real quick before we go. And that is, I think this idea of the changing workplace. First of all, how do you see it changing over the next decade, and how much better are we going to have to be at working together in order to make sure that as humans, we are delivering the kind of value that I think is unique to what human beings can provide in the workplace versus what technology brings to the table.
We can't be afraid of success. We can't be afraid to be inclusive. I mean, the big danger in what's happening now is Amazon can create, $100 billion of value with half or fewer people than even Google did. And I think, fewer people creating more is the real underlying risk. How do we have more people creating more? I mean, that we can really now start to solve some of the big challenges if we're inclusive, if we democratize this stuff. You see it in Silicon Valley. There's such a temptation to build business models serving these few people that have incredible abundance, warm towels delivered by drone in 5 minutes, like all these business models that are that can kind of get off the ground by serving into all the wealth that has been created, both in terms of capital and knowledge. Big problem. We need to deliberately build businesses that democratize these ideas. We need to deliberately focus on education businesses. We need to not be afraid of success, because we have seen amazing things come out of all quarters of the planet. And we have seen how diversity can fuel creative solutions to all of our problems. So I think that is something that, like, culturally we really have to build in. We have to look at that democratization again. We have to not let this concentration of wealth play out to its natural conclusion. And so I think it's just just more and more important that we're calling on the entrepreneurial community to build businesses that democratize. We're not only building peer groups for CEOs, we're building peer groups for everyone. And I think that we can't be afraid of this world of abundance, because it's going to be amazing if we bring everyone along for the ride.
So finally, I wouldn't want us to leave without our audience knowing a whole lot more about how do they go about learning more about circles and maybe making circles a part of their life and their growth.
Well, our website is the word circles with a dot before the E for España, where this idea was incubated. And the best thing people interested can do after you sort of check out what we're about, maybe read your book, read a few others, ask people that are in peer groups, is we are launching this workshop, which is going to be a very light way to build these leadership skills that we're talking about and take them back to work, not necessarily using our platform, just taking these ideas that have come out of the movement and spreading them. And we've seen with just a few sessions, with a taste of what deep feels like, with some hands-on practice on how you design a meeting to use these principles, that more and more people are coming out with a set of leadership skills that can really apply these things in all these different contexts. So my invitation is for people to sign up for that. We'll educate you, and then when you go back into your workplace and your social places and your careers, and have all kinds of different creative uses for these principles, and are ready to help us spread this movement, we'll be right there behind you to help support you. So go to Circles, www.circl.es, and sign up for that program, and let us transform you into Jedi Knights of the Power of Peer movement.
That's wonderful. Dan Hoffman, thank you for being on the show, and just really appreciate everything you're doing, and thanks again for everything.
Thanks, Leo. Real pleasure. So glad to be fighting the good fight along with you.
You bet. Thanks.
Take care.
Thanks for joining us today. To learn more about Peer Advantage, to submit questions to Leo and our guests, and to subscribe to the Year of the Peer podcast, please visit us at leobottary.com. It's leobottary.com. This podcast is produced by me, Randy Cantrell, hosted, of course, by Leo Bottary. Music provided by Kevin MacLeod, Vibe Ace, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0 license.